Hi everyone, thanks for visiting my YouTube channel and for your continuous support through subscription. It gives me great joy. I've always said that this is a channel whereby you get all the academic support if you're a student or if you are just interested in the Queen's language. This is a place to be. It's a hub of knowledge where we discuss matters academic and also we touch a little bit on contemporary issues. I'm Carol Karuga. Welcome to today's session. So I want to discuss poetry, which is an area that every student of English has encountered a challenge. And therefore, I want to demystify poetry and actually help us understand the mysteries in poetry. And at the end of the day, we can as well become poets. Yeah. You know what they say, that a journey of 1,000 miles begin with one step. So consider this as your maiden step to a long journey of understanding poetry and becoming a poet and actually appreciating this beautiful genre. All right. So poetry, it's as beautiful as this picture. When I think about a poem, I just think about a beautiful piece that is put together and addressed to an individual or a country or the world at large. So we want to begin by defining poetry. Yeah, let's get a better definition of, if you are told to define poetry, how would your definition be? So I have tried to come up with 3 definitions. They are quite simple, though we'll take time to elaborate and explain each definition. So the first one, poetry is a form of literature that uses aesthetic and often rhythmic qualities of a language to evoke meaning. So think of an individual who wants to communicate a certain message to an individual or to a certain group of people. So you want to put your message in a beautiful way. So we are looking at, it's a form of literature. And when you think of literature, we are thinking about books, novels, novellas, short stories written with a specific purpose. So for poetry, it's the same, but then you will depend on the aesthetic features of language. So think about, I want to give an example of when you're preparing a meal, the ingredients that you will put in place in order to prepare that delicious meal. So it is in the same way. You want to communicate something, and therefore you need several devices, you need several ingredients, you need several beautiful pieces of language to help you communicate your message. So that's poetry. Yeah. Um, Anything, a message communicated with a beautiful language. So what makes poetry stands out from other forms of writing? It's the language itself. It's beautiful. It has more ingredients, like the way I've given the example of preparing a meal. You'll put more ingredients in poetry than in other pieces of writing. So here in poetry, we are looking at those aesthetic features. We'll be looking at them in my next video, that when you want to write a poem, you want to bring all the ingredients together. We call them elements of poetry. You will have a simile, you will have metaphors, you will think of paradox. So those are the ingredients that we are talking about that makes poetry stand out from other forms of writing. So you can consider that definition. So it's also literary work in which the expression of feelings and ideas is given intensity by the use of distinctive style and rhythm. Okay, so it's almost the same as the first definition, whereby whatever you want to express, you have to express it using a distinct language, a stylistic language, not just layman language or formal language, but you want to put in place some beautiful vocabulary, some beautiful elements, some beautiful stylistic devices in order to communicate your message. Okay, so it's a creative piece. It's a creative piece. Yeah, you will find that poems, it could be a short poem or a long poem, but there is a lot of creativity in putting the lines together, in putting the stanzas together. So you want to take time to think about your choices of words. You don't just start writing, but you will take time and shop for words, yes, and put the words together and produce this beautiful piece known as a poem. All right. Yes, so you wish to pose a question to us that, have you ever received a poem dedicated to you? Do you still treasure such poems? For me, I do. I have a collection of poems. Most of them were dedicated to me, and you realize that those poems are very rich and expressive. The language used there, it's so beautiful and well thought of, and it actually makes you feel special depending on the type of poem that you've received. So this actually takes us to the next section. After defining what poetry is, we want to look at the different types of poems. Yeah, the different types of poems that we'll encounter, especially if you're a student. All right, so we have several types. We have a sonnet. We also have a haiku, an elegy, Malik, a ballad, an ode, and a free verse. The list is extensive, but I have thought of, for introduction purposes, let's try looking at these about 7 types of poems, so that we get a better understanding of this beautiful topic. So what's a sonnet? A sonnet is a 1 stanza poem that comprises 14 lines. So here it's about the structure of this poem. For your poem to be named or to be considered as a sonnet, it should be a 1 stanza poem. Don't worry about what a stanza. In my next video, we want to look at the poetic jargons. Yeah, you know, the vocabulary that are only used when we are discussing poetry, and one of them would be a stanza. All right, so a sonnet is a 1 stanza poem that has 14 lines. So let me flip through for us to get an idea of what a sonnet is. So this is a sonnet. You can see that it hasn't, the poet, whoever wrote this poem, didn't break it in several stanzas. It's just 1 stanza. And the lines are 14, if you can count with me. Okay, so you need to be very particular. For your poem to be declared a sonnet, it should be 1 stanza and 14 lines. And the story doesn't end there. All right. You also need to remember that a sonnet, it has a fixed rhyme scheme. Again, this is another poetic jargon that we'll discuss in the next video. What's a rhyme scheme? It's a pattern. It's a pattern created by the rhyming words at the end of each line. Okay, for example, in this case, you see the word eyes and clays, they rhyme, just like the word state and fate, hope and scoop, list. We also have the word state and gate. Those are rhyming words, and they produce a beautiful pattern known as a rhyme scheme. We will discuss the different types of rhyme schemes in the next videos, whereby you have a regular rhyme scheme or an irregular rhyme scheme. But for now, remember, we are looking at the different types of poems. So a sonnet, it's a one stanza poem with 14 lines and a defined rhyme scheme. If you'd ask me, I think writing a sonnet is the most complex thing that anyone can do. And for starters, I wouldn't recommend you to start writing a sonnet. You really need to sit down and think of the rhyming words at the end of every line. And therefore, if you're a beginner, you might want to think otherwise. But for proficient writers like William Shakespeare, he had a flair for writing sonnets. In fact, this is one of his many sonnets. He enjoyed writing those complex poems, but it's okay. That was his gifting. All right. So the second type would be haiku. 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 A haiku is a Japanese poem with 3 lines in each stanza, and they don't rhyme. So the word rhyme will appear or will be mentioned in our discussion. So it's still another jargon that we'll understand later. So think about a poem with 3 lines in each stanza. So you could have like 5 stanzas, but the catch is every stanza should have 3 lines. But I've also seen some daring poets who package their message in one stanza, a stanza comprising 3 lines. So by all rights, that poem qualifies to be called a haiku. Haiku, a Japanese poem. Okay, then what about the inspiration? What inspires you to write a haiku? You're inspired by nature. So you're walking along the beach and you're just captivated by something, and you pen down your experience in a one stanza or 5 stanza poem, in which every stanza has 3 lines. So just look at this example here. Butterflies are cool in the big, huge green forest. They fly up so high. Imagine this is an example of a haiku. Yeah, you know, once you become a poet, you like expressing yourself in writing. So I'm thinking of this individual holding a beautiful butterfly, and you just describe it in a haiku. And it's a poem. All right. Now, if you do a juxtaposition or a comparison between a haiku and a sonnet, you'll understand what I mentioned earlier, that for starters, I would prefer that you consider writing a haiku. It's not very complicated, and then you're not limited to a particular rhyme scheme. You are at liberty to give it your rhyme scheme or do without a particular rhyme scheme. So that's a haiku, a Japanese poem. Then moving on, we want to consider another type known as an elegy. So an elegy is a poem, but in this case, a sad poem, usually written to praise and express sorrow to someone who is dead. It's a form of a tribute. Okay, I'm thinking of a situation where you've attended someone's burial and everyone has given a tribute. The eulogy has been read. Okay, don't you want to pen down a poem in praise of the deceased, especially if they were your closest friend or relative or something, they were your kith and kin? So a poem of that nature, it's called an elegy. It's an elegy. All right. The length is at your discretion. It could be a short one or a long one. There is no rule regulating the length. You can just write and write until you feel you've expressed everything you had concerning the deceased. So just have a look at this elegy. A thousand times we needed you. A thousand times we cried. A thousand times we died. You never would have died. All right. So you can see even the tone. There's a lot of nostalgia whereby the poet reaches a point of reminiscing the good times they had with the deceased. And you know, poetry, it's a form, it's a therapy in its own, whereby you release those suppressed feelings. Right? You know, in our African culture, they say that men don't cry. But by penning down a poem, you might actually release your sorrow, your sadness, and express yourself in writing. So that's an elegy. Has a somber mood, nostalgic mood. Yeah, an elegy. So it's the nature. Again, you can look at the three different categories. Above, we had looked at a haiku, which is inspired by nature, but this one, it's actually following the demise of someone. Yeah, you express yourself in a poem. Okay, so there's still another beautiful type of a poem, which is known as a limerick. What a limerick, apart from having a beautiful name. What a limerick. So it's a 5-line poem, okay? A poem comprising 5 lines in a single stanza, and again, a defined line scheme. A defined line scheme. I had mentioned earlier that a line scheme is a pattern. It's a pattern created by the rhyming words, okay? In case you are still struggling with those terminologies, watch out the next video whereby we will just concentrate on the poetic jargon, this vocabulary that are only used when it comes to poetry. So a limerick, a poem comprising 5 lines in a single stanza. And the rhyme scheme is A, A, B, B, and A. All right, I won't delve deeper into the rhyme scheme because I'm sure I will tackle it at length in the next video. Okay, so we are just looking at the structure of a limerick, and this is an example. It's just for laughs. I should have mentioned that it gives comical relief, you know, especially in this corona pandemic period. Poets were encouraged to write limericks to just ease the tension and the complexity of the pandemic. So this is an example, nothing serious. It's just for comic relief. Yeah, as stated earlier here, most limericks are comedic. They are comedic. They don't tackle vital issues or complex issues. They're just for laughs. Okay. There was a young girl on a tower who looked just as fresh as a flower. Her hair was like silk, her skin smooth as milk, but her breath made the strongest night cow. Quite interesting and hilarious. Yeah, they're just for laughs. Nothing. We don't really have a particular theme captured in a limerick. It's just for fun. You want to be hilarious and naughty in your writing, so that's a limerick. Okay, and we still have another category known as a ballad, which is a poem that tells a story. Okay. Remember the traditional storytelling sessions that children had with their grandparents? So it takes a similar form whereby the poet or the person narrating the poem or performing the poem will tell a story. So there is a particular storyline There's a story narrated in a ballad, and usually in a 4-line stanza. So the length that again can vary. A ballad could have like 6 stanzas, but now the structure is, every structure is comprising 4 lines, and you will actually feel it's a story. You remember how a story has an opening formula, like once upon a time? It might not necessarily have that kind of an introduction, but you will feel that the persona is actually narrating or telling a story, whereby the second stanza picks from the first stanza and so on. It's spiral. It's a short story in verse, which is intended to be sung. All right, if you were to look at the etymology of the term ballad, a ballad is a song. And now when we come to poetry, ballads were meant to be sung. You know, like when someone serenades you, or when someone serenades their loved one, if they were to do it in a poem, then a ballad would be the perfect choice. So someone wants to express their love to their loved one, like when we met, how the journey has been. So you can package everything in a poem, and that poem will be referred to as a ballad. So it is a short story in verse, all right, which is intended to be sung with the accompaniment of music. So there should be some music playing in the background when the person is performing a ballad or serenading their loved one. So we want to, and it can actually tackle any topic, but then the issue here, it's a story. Just look at this example here. It's about soccer for the football fanatics in my viewership. There's a lot of different sports, but soccer is the best. It's more fun than baseball and better than all the rest. Soccer is my favorite sport. I feel that the persona is narrating a story or telling us about something they have a knack for. And in this case, this is soccer. So soccer is my favorite sport. What else can I say? It can be a lot of fun if you know how to play. I really want our team to score. So it's a narration of their love for football. So the topic varies depending with the persona. But then the thing is, there is a story in this poem. And the structure again, every stanza comprises 4 lines. So that's a ballad. And we still have another type. We are looking at the different types of poems. So we have an ode. What's an ode? An ode is a short lyric poem that praises an individual or an idea or an event. So praising an individual. Remember, we had an elegy whereby you are praising the deceased, but here you are giving credit where it's due. All right, in our African context, we normally recommend that people should eulogize us while we are alive and kicking. I wouldn't appreciate a situation whereby someone has never told me that they love me, but when I kick the bucket, that's the time they will be all emotional, praising me. But when I was alive, they never said anything to praise me. So do you want to praise someone for being with you through thick and thin, for helping you during your dark moment? So an ode would be the kind of poem to consider. So you're praising that individual. You're also praising an idea. Yeah, you're praising an idea or an event So I know for the football lovers, it would be World Cup, you know, all these big international competitions. So what are you, do you want to praise something or an idea like feminism, Marxism, yeah, capitalism, democracy? Those are big major ideas. You can praise them in an ode. Okay. So here is an example of an ode whereby someone decided to, where someone decided to praise their friend. When she sits beside me and listens to me for hours, when she understands something without a word, when she wipes my tears in pain, I know she's my true friend. I'm so lucky to have you in my life and wish to have you again in the next birth. Having you in my life has increased my worth. Wow. I think we should do this over and over again. Let people know how much we cherish them. Yeah. Let them know that we appreciate what they do in our lives. And so if you are going poetic, then that category will be considered as an ode. All right, so we are almost winding up the introduction section, and we are wrapping it up with a free verse. So again, this is for all the beginners in the house. Yeah, you can actually consider writing a free verse, especially when I equip you with the other elements of poetry and with the poetic jargon. You know, when you have enough words, then you can put them together, and we, the gurus, the poetry gurus, we are going to categorize your poem. So what's a free verse? It's another category, and it's just like the name suggests. When you're writing a free verse, as in a poem, under the category free verse, there are no rules. Yeah, you will not be prescribing to or subscribing to any rule. You won't be very careful on the line scheme. So there are no rules, and the writers can do whatever they choose. You will actually have something called poetic license, just like a driving license. Successful poets have something we call poetic license, as in you can manipulate language to fit your purpose. Okay, so here you are not subscribing to any rule, and you can write, you can choose to you can do whatever you choose. You can either decide to rhyme or not. You can either decide to establish a particular rhythm or not. So it is often used in contemporary poetry. All right. But at the end of the day, a free verse, it's a form of artistic expression with no rules. So it's a poem, yeah, but you're not prescribing or subscribing to any rule. So just write. If an idea strikes your mind, pen it down. All right, put it in a stanza. And if anyone asks you to categorize your poem, tell them it's a free verse, and you will have passed the mark, because this is what beginners are advised to do, to just write a free verse. Let it be a creative piece. Remember my introduction and definition of poetry, that a poem, it's a creative piece put together by use of figurative language or stylistic devices or beautiful vocabulary. Yes, so if you have nice words and you have an idea, put the idea down by the use of those nice stylistic languages or devices. So that poem will be categorized as a free verse. Okay, so that's it for now. Remember, we are doing introduction. We were actually looking at introduction to poetry. And as a good teacher, I will always recap what I've done today. Okay, it was poetry. We defined poetry, and we've looked at the different types of poems that we have out there. And as I've mentioned, this is a disclaimer that these are not the only types we have. But for starters, we needed to give you just a drop in the ocean and try to persuade you to change to change your mindset or perception about poetry. So I needed to give an example of a free verse. So this is a free verse. And the poet decided to talk about nature. And they said that nature, it's a beautiful thing. We go outside and it's right there, but we do not seem to notice it, with trees growing all around us, birds soaring in the air, flowers of many colors with sweet scents, animals resting in the shade. You know, you, as if you're following me, this is just an expression. You're just writing what you're observing out there, and hence it's called a free verse. So guys, that's it for now. Thanks for joining in. Remember to subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate so much. And let's meet in the next section, whereby I'll be discussing elements of poetry and also the poetic jargon, the poetic jargons. Yeah. So that's it for now. Thanks for listening in, for watching. Bye bye.